What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. We'd also like to give a special shout out to one of Not Your Average Meta's generous patrons, Martin Stanley, for everything he's done to help out the channel. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you our last game of the season, which has us wrapping up Season 4 of the channel. This week's matchup features Brendan making a return playing his mono-black Sheoldred the Apocalypse deck, Patrick returning this week playing his mono-white Sephara Skyblades deck, Foggrow playing his old Golgari buddy Grismold the Dreadsower, and Foil back again playing his Dimir Fairy deck being led by Talion the Kindly Lord. Now that we're fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Patrick plays a Terramorphic Expanse before he cracks it to go get a Plains from his library while Fog draws return and plays a tapped Haunted Mire. Foil plays a tapped Dismal Backwater gaining a life while Brendan draws return and then plays a Swamp, a Mox Opal, and then also pays to cast an Imperial Seal going into his library to get a card while he loses 2 life. Patrick plays a second Plains for turn while Fog draws and then plays a Forest before paying 2 for a Talisman of Resilience. Foil draws and plays an Exotic Orchard before passing his turn to Brendan, who plays another Swamp. Brendan then pays to cast a Dark Ritual, giving him enough mana to cast his commander Sheoldred, which gets immediately countered by Foil with an Arcane Denial. On his upkeep, Patrick draws for turn while Foil draws a card and Brendan draws 2. He then plays a third Plains for turn and passes to Fog, who draws before he then taps out in order to cast his commander Grismold. He then goes to his end step, which has him generously gifting each of the players a 1/1 plant token. Foil draws and then plays a Swamp before paying 2 for an Arcane Signet, which uses to help him cast a Mind Stone. Brendan untaps and draws for turn before playing a third Swamp. He then pays to cast a Soul Ring as well as a Mind Crank and a Temple Bell. Patrick draws for turn and then pays 3 and casts Invoke the Divine, which has him destroying Brendan's Mind Crank and has him gaining 4 life. Fog plays a Terramorphic Expanse for turn before paying 2 to cast an Agent of the Shadow Thieves, as well as paying an additional 1 to cast a Blister Pod. He then sacks his Terramorphic to go get a Swamp from his library while he goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Patrick, triggering his enchantment, putting a 1/1 counter on his commander and having him deal 4 commander damage. He then goes to his end step and everyone gets an additional plant token. Foil draws and then plays an untapped Watery Grave, losing 2 life. He then pays 4 in order to cast his commander Talion, choosing 2 as she enters play before paying an additional 2 to cast a Dimir Signet. On his end step, Brendan activates his bell, having each player draw a card. Brendan then draws for turn and plays another Swamp. He then pays to recast Sheoldred a second time and passes turn. Patrick draws and then loses 2 life before playing another Plains. He then pays 2 to cast a Vanquish the Horde to wipe the board of all the creatures, which has Fog creating a Scion token. Fog draws for turn and then taps out as well as sacking a Scion token to recast his commander a second time. He then ends his turn and everyone once again creates a plant token. Foil draws and then casts a Layla Cunning Conqueror before he then plays a Dimir Aqueduct for turn, bouncing a Swamp back to his hand. On his end step, Brendan once again activates his Temple Bell, having each player draw a card. Brendan then draws for turn and then pays 6 to cast an Arcana Revenant before passing. Patrick draws and then casts an Adaptive Automaton, choosing Angels as it enters play. Fog draws and then plays a Swamp for turn before paying 2 for an Elysian Caryatid. He then goes to combat, this time swinging Grismold over at Foil, which has him getting a 1/1 counter and dealing 4 more commander damage. He then once again goes to his end step and everyone creates another plant token. On his end step, Foil then casts Consider, which has him putting a Swamp into his graveyard before he then draws a card and creates a Fairy token. Foil then draws for turn and replays his Swamp. He then casts a pair of Lightning Greaves as well as casting a Mocking Sprite. He then pays to equip the Lightning Greaves to his Mocking Sprite and then goes to combat, swinging one of his Fairies at each of his opponents. Everyone then takes their damage, which has Foil goading one of their creatures before Brendan activates the bell, having each player draw a card. Brendan then draws for turn and plays an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. He then plays a Jeweled Lotus, which he sacrifices in order to help him cast Sheoldred a third time, and in response, Foil casts a Frantic Search. Foil then draws 2 cards and discards 2 cards before he untaps 3 of his lands and creates another Fairy token. Brendan then casts a free Deadly Rollick targeting Fog's commander, and in response, Fog casts a Tamiya Safekeeping, giving his commander Hexproof while he then gains 2 life. Brendan then pays to cast a Dark Deal to try to wheel everyone's hands, and Foil counters it with a Mana Drain. Finally, Brendan pays to cast a Words of Waste before going to combat, attacking Patrick, who blocks with one of his tokens, putting a counter on Fog's commander. Patrick then draws for turn and loses 2 life before playing a Plains. He then pays 6 and casts an Aegis Angel, choosing the Automaton when he enters play. He then goes to combat, swinging his Automaton over at Fog, who just takes a 3 damage. Fog draws for turn and loses 2 life, before he then pays and casts a Blood Funnel. He then casts a From Beyond, which has him sacking one of his tokens and putting another counter on his commander. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Brendan, which has him gaining an additional counter, and Brendan blocking with one of his plant tokens, but still taking 6 commander damage. This then puts another counter on Fog's commander before he then goes to his end step, having each player create another plant token. Foil draws for turn and loses 2 life before playing a swamp. He then pays 4 to cast Rankle, Master of Pranks, before paying an additional 4 to cast a Distant Melody. This then has him drawing 5 cards and losing 10 life before he then pays to cast a Talisman of Dominance. He then goes to combat, swinging Layla over at Brendan while he swings Rankle over at Fog. Each player then takes their damage, and Foil chooses to have each player discard a card and draw a card, which has each of Brendan's opponents losing 2 life while he gains 2 life. Each player then sacrifices a creature, which has Fog putting 4 more counters on his commander. On his end step, Brendan activates his bell, having each player draw a card and lose a life while he gains 2 life. Brendan then draws for turn and gains 2 life before playing a swamp. He then once again uses his bell, having each player draw a card and lose 2 life while he gains 2 life. He then pays to cast a Damnable Pact, where X is equal to 13, targeting Fog. In response, Fog casts Unravel the Aether, which has him sacrificing one of his tokens and putting a counter on his commander, before he then has Brendan shuffling his Words of Waste into his library and takes his 26 damage, getting taken out of the game. Brendan then goes to combat, swinging Sheoldred over at Patrick, who blocks with his plant token. Patrick draws for turn and loses 2 more life before he then plays another Plains and pays 6 to cast a Sunblast Angel. In response, Foil taps 3 of his fairies, as well as casting a Dark Ritual in order to help him cast a Tegral Scouring. This then has the board getting wiped away of all the creatures except the Automaton, and Foil creating 3 fairy tokens. Patrick then swings his Automaton over Brendan for 3 damage before passing turn. Foil draws for turn and then plays an island before paying 7 for his Shadow Puppeteers. This then creates him 2 more 1/1 fairy tokens when he enters play. Foil then equips the Lightning Greaves of the Puppeteers before going to combat. This then has him swinging all of his fairies over Brendan, turning him into 4/4 dragon creatures and taking him down to 16 life. Brendan draws for turn and plays another swamp. He then uses his bell to have each player draw a card before casting an Exsanguinate, where X is equal to 8. In response, Foil casts a Factor of Fiction, which has him revealing the top 5 cards of his library before he then chooses Patrick to separate him into 2 piles. Foil then chooses the 1-card pile before each of Brendan's opponents lose 8 life and he gains 16. Patrick draws and plays the Plains before casting a Chroma Angel of Wrath and swinging him over at Foil, taking him down to 1 life. Foil draws for turn and then casts a Sign of Una before paying to equip him with the Lightning Greaves and going to combat. He then swings all of his fairies over at Brendan, which gives him enough damage to take Brendan out of the game, before he then decides to go out on his own terms, using his Talisman to deal 1 damage to himself, giving Patrick the win. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.